June 19th is going to be a day that lives in diplomatic infamy in the United States history, I believe, because Secretary of State Tony Blinken went to Beijing, met with General Secretary and Dictator for Life Xi Jinping, kowtowed, announced that we're sticking with one policy. Let's play that. Cut number 5 very quickly, Ben.
On Taiwan, I reiterated the long-standing U.S. One China policy. That policy has not changed.
Then Secretary Blinken told NBC News that the spy balloon chapter, quote, should be closed after China talks, only to find this morning in the Wall Street Journal a story that Beijing plans a new training facility in Cuba, raising the prospect of Chinese troops on America's doorstep. It raised a lot more than that. It also raised Chairman Mike Turner of the House Intelligence Committee, great congressman from Ohio. Good morning, Chairman Turner. How are you?
Good morning, Hugh. Doing great. Thanks for all that you do. And it's very important to get the messages out that what our threats are currently, and you're certainly great at doing that.
What do you think about this Wall Street Journal report about a Chinese military base being built on Cuba?
Well, I think it certainly shows the failure of this administration. You know, as you recall, the Obama administration opened ties to Cuba. It was supposed to be a normalization of relationship. And Cuba, as you know, was a Russian satellite, a Soviet Union satellite forever. And now that they're welcoming China in, which obviously China in undertaking this means to do harm to the United States and our interests, it shows weakness on the part of this administration, that China would feel so emboldened to do so after, you've been describing some of the things that they've done recently with the balloon, with the police stations. The last time that Blinken met the Chinese delegation in Alaska, he was resoundingly scolded by them, saying that the United States was the aggressor when clearly China is the aggressor. All of these things show weakness, and certainly I think that shows why China is expanding its influence and certainly threatening the United States.
You know, in the 1930s, every time Hitler would do something aggression, whether he reindustrialized the Ruhr, whether he reoccupied the Rhineland, whether he did the Anschluss, intimidated Czechoslovakia, built weapons secretly in Russia, all the different things that he did, the Allies would meet with him and say, that's okay, let's move forward, and they would agree. This just looks like appeasement to me with a different name, Secretary Blinken's trip does. What do you think, Chairman Turner?
Well, I think when you take in light of the fact that President Xi, when he met with Vladimir Putin in Moscow, stated that they were working together and that they were working together to bring about change that hadn't happened in 100 years. And you and I know what was 100 years ago. It was World War I and World War II. And it was authoritarianism against democracy, and democracy won. That he's trying to bring about the change that hasn't happened in 100 years. To then have a meeting where it's not even raised that, by the way, you're publicly declaring your aggression on democracy and toward the United States. It's China's behavior that needs to change, not just the window dressing of U.S. policy.
Now, what is actually possible for the United States to do about an incipient military buildup of Chinese forces on Cuba?
Well, clearly, we have an ability, both diplomatically with Cuba and China, to impact this. But the first step is acknowledging it and acknowledging that it's wrong and that the United States expects them to take different action. In this instance, instead of them openly stating that you can't send balloons across our sovereign territory, you can't open police stations in the United States, you can't open in the Western Hemisphere facilities for spying, for military training, for intelligence training, and threaten the United States. They're just saying it's time for us to be friends again, and China is not stopping. They need to be called out. They need to be identified. Their behavior needs to be identified as wrong. And that certainly is the first step.
I recall, and I learned a lot about, because I went to college in the 70s, the Cuban Missile Crisis, 13 Days by Robert Kennedy. It's all very, very fresh. Graham Allison wrote the Crisis book. The prospect of Soviet ICBMs was troubling because it would give us less time to respond, less time to figure out whether it's a real launch or not. China has hypersonics. If they put the hypersonics onto a military base quietly and covertly, because they're not very big, that exposes the entire United States immediately to rapid, just seconds, Mr. Chairman. It's unacceptable.
Absolutely. And as you know, they're tripling the size of their nuclear weapons ICBMs that they're going to have on mainland China. So, I mean, clearly they're building a military for war and for conflict and for aggression. And this is an administration that won't even call them out and identify that they are going down a path with open intentions of threatening the United States.
It is also, it's absurd to me to say the balloon chapter is closed. I don't think we got it all back yet. Have we got all the balloon back? I don't know if you can tell me that or not.
I can't.
Okay.
But I can tell you this. I certainly wouldn't be on television saying it was an accident, they didn't mean it. The administration excusing this behavior is really unconscionable. And it really is, I think, places us at risk because it emboldens China. If there have no consequences for clear acts of aggression and clear violations of our sovereignty, then they're going to continue and they're just going to escalate.
This is something of a disastrous trip because they barked and barked and barked. They violated our sovereignty, and Tony Blinken goes over and says everything is okay. And the body language is horrible. And a 35-minute meeting isn't a 35-minute meeting. It's a 5-minute I'll accept your apology moment. And it will be used for propaganda purposes in China. What were they thinking, Mr. Chairman?
No, I don't know. It's consistent, though, with what you see with this administration. With the abrupt pullout of Afghanistan, the ways in which they have portrayed the United States and to its allies, what it's doing with Iran, where Iran's continuing to enrich nuclear weapons, trying to seek a nuclear weapon, where they're engaging them in talks, trying to get them back into the failed, known as the JCPOA, Iran nuclear deal. And in each of these, they're not dealing through strength. They're dealing through weakness. And weakness, it results in what we've seen with Russia invading Ukraine, of Russia believing that the United States was not going to respond. And, of course, we have now responded by supplying weapons to Ukraine. And Ukraine has been able to fight much better than anybody had believed that they would perform, to the extent that Russia is on its heels, on its border. But the administration was pushed into that by Congress. Congress pushed them into giving them lethal weapons and supporting Ukraine. But you get those type of results when you have this type of weakness.
Now, speaking of Ukraine, before I move on to my next topic, which is intelligence documents in private homes, I want to talk about Ukraine. We don't know much about the alleged offensive. There just aren't any reports other than it's bloody and it's hard. What do you think is going on there?
Well, I was in Ukraine before the offensive, and I was briefed on the plans for the offensive and met with Zelensky and went to where some of their troops were training. And I can tell you, this is successful, and it's successful because it is an offensive. The fact that Ukraine has changed the tables so that Ukraine, with new weapons, new training, fresh troops of their own, have taken the offensive is in itself change, and in itself puts pressure on Russia's aggression, and I think is going to, in the end, be successful for Ukraine. But the fact that it is an offensive and they're not playing defensive is what's extraordinary.
Tell me what you think it means that we don't know anything about it, because when they had their stunning offensive last year, we learned about it in real time as their tanks rolled across the northern part of the Russian-occupied Ukrainian territory.
Well, I think we are getting reports, and I think the confirmation. I mean, this is a very busy, very complex, very large undertaking. These are not small strikes. These aren't the type of military interactions that have breaks. This is a sustained offensive, and so the information that we're getting is that the offensive is progressing and is on the offensive side, not defensive. They are gaining ground, certainly I think that was the goal, is to put them in the situation where they're on the offensive on the against Russia aggression in their own country.
Are you getting real-time reports, Mr. Chairman?
We're getting regular reports.
All right. Now I want to turn to a classified document. You still live in Dayton, don't you?
I do.
Any intel documents in Dayton at Congressman Turner's house?
There is no classified documents in Dayton, Ohio.
We know all about the Trump document.
My facility. There are certainly right Patterson Air Force Base, which you know well, which is just a short stone toss from my place. But no, I do not have classified documents.
You see, you're a Bengals fan, so it would be perfectly understandable if you got confused and brought things home you shouldn't, because Bengals fans are a little bit confused anyway. By the way, what do you think about the opener against the Browns?
Hey, I'm for anybody who's playing for Ohio, right?
All right, good, middle of the road answer there. Let's go back to these documents. Do you know of any members from the legislative body who, like former Senator and former President of the Senate, Vice President Biden, took home classified documents and put them in their garage?
So we brought in the archives, the archivists, to give us an understanding of what they had found and what their experience had been. And they told us, shockingly, that 80 members of Congress, members of the House and the Senate, have packaged up their documents and sent them to libraries to be held, where those libraries subsequently got in touch with the archives and said, we found classified documents, including former Senator Muskie, who had 98 classified documents. So, clearly there is a systemic problem here. However, it is a failure of character to walk out with classified documents. I can tell you that on my intelligence committee, there are 25 people there. Everybody has just been shocked with the amount of casualness that we've seen in the cases that have come before us of people taking documents. And when you look at the documents that President Biden had, that as both as a vice president and senator at his own home, they should not have been there. They are clearly documents that should have been a control facility. Same for President Trump. Those documents should not have left the White House.
Now, when I was running the Nixon Foundation, former President Nixon's post-presidency papers were stored there. NARA concluded that some of those post-presidency papers were classified because he corresponded with presidents, as all presidents do, about his foreign travels. And we got in a long argument, and I thought they were ridiculous and petty and stupid, and eventually resolved it down to like 6 documents, less than a box, and they took them away. We're closing. Do you trust NARA on this stuff? They're lefties.
Well, actually, what we've been trying to do is there have to be changes made to the law. The way that this whole process of ending an administration occurs needs to be cleaned up, and we're going to work on that.
Chairman Mike Turner, great Buckeye. Good to talk to you. Go Browns. Don't go anywhere, America. Coming right back on the Hugh Hewitt Show.